everyone. This will be the second chapter of Danny and the Phantom, written and read by Insect Overlord. This chapter is titled Guilt is Healthy, Shame is Not, and has content warnings for scars and health problems and mentioned child neglect. The week following Danny's accident was a whirlwind of doctors and tests. He had heart echoes, IV fluids, and plenty of bandage changes. The first time he saw his left arm, he nearly fainted. Skin grafts covered his hand and lower arm, and a prominent Lichtenberg scar traveled from his palm to his heart. It was very obvious, though the nurse told him it would fade with time. The skin grafts made his hand feel funny when he moved it. When he could move it, anyway. His accident had left him with minimal function in his arm. He could only feel pressure and pain, not light touch, and what he could feel was muted, like there was something in between his hand and whatever it touched. Though the scar was the scariest part of everything to Danny, him being self-conscious and a teenager and all, it wasn't the worst of his new issues, according to his doctor. He left the hospital a week after his admittance with a laundry list of diagnoses, the most worrying being arrhythmia. His heart was beating all out of whack, which gave him chest pain and made him get dizzy easily. He wasn't allowed to wear his binder, which he was understandably upset about, but neither his parents nor doctor would budge on it. He had to take medication for it, and his mom was super serious about him not missing a dose and telling her if he felt bad. Part of him felt happy she cared about his health so much. The other was curious and couldn't stop wondering why. She had been attentive and, well, motherly with him since his accident. What was different about him now? What had changed? She feels guilty. She doesn't care. She just feels bad. I care about you, Danny. I'm on your side. A voice echoed in his mind. Danny startled where he sat drawing on the couch in the living room, dropping his pen. Danny, is everything all right? Jazz asked from her spot in the love seat, looking up from her book, The Psychology Behind Young Minds. Yes, sorry, my pen just, slipped when I was writing, he explained, holding up his left hand. He was right-handed. Jazz eyed him dubiously. Right. She drew out the word, but didn't comment any further, choosing to continue reading her book. That voice was familiar. Where had he heard it before? Forget me already? It sounded amused. Danny almost dropped his pen again. He hesitated to talk to the thing out loud, lest his sister think he was going crazy. Maybe he was, if he was hearing voices. Who are you? Danny attempted to communicate via thoughts. I'm the one who saved you, silly. The voice's response brought with it a memory. One Danny didn't recall. It was from another's perspective. Danny saw who must have been himself, decked out in a white hazmat suit and surrounded by green. The suit was shredded from his left arm to his chest, and his face was contorted with pain. Danny swallowed back his nausea as this not memory overlapped with his own memory of white-hot agony and so much green. The perspective of the not memory shifted, as if falling towards Danny, into him. As suddenly as it had come, the not memory faded, and Danny was left reeling at the shift. So, you're what, inside me? He questioned the voice. Honestly, that was a bit creepy. It's not creepy. I'm the only thing keeping you alive right now. You should be thanking me, really. Oh, the doctors had said he shouldn't have survived. Maybe this thing, whatever they were, was the reason his heart was still stubbornly beating. Mostly, anyway. So, who are you? He questioned. The voice was quiet for a moment before they responded. I'm Phantom. We are going to have so much fun together. Maddie viciously scrubbed every last spot off the plate she was cleaning. If the plate was sentient, it probably would have yelled at her that it hadn't done anything wrong, but alas, it wasn't, and Maddie only scrubbed harder. She was being avoidant, and she knew it, but she couldn't seem to escape her thoughts. Ever since she and Jack had found Danny's still, far, far too still, body outside the somehow activated portal, she had been torn between keeping an eye on her son and returning to her research. They had an actual, functional portal to another dimension in the basement, and the scientist in Maddie wanted so badly to go measure ectoplasm levels and design new equipment based on her findings. But the mother in her wanted to destroy the awful thing for what it had done to her son. What she had done to her son. It was her that left the door unlocked. Her that ignored Danny until he thought the best way to get her attention was to try to fix what his parents had dedicated their lives to instead of him. It was easier to blame the portal, though. Maddie pushed the sponge against the long-since cleaned plate harder. There was a distant, shattering sound, and she found herself staring at her slowly bleeding hands, surrounded by glass and soap bubbles. The only things she could hear were her racing thoughts and the ever-flowing water from the sink. She stared for far too long before her brain processed the problem, and she cleaned up her hands and the glass. Phantom had gone quiet after they introduced themselves, and Danny wasn't complaining. It was strange to suddenly have another voice in his head after spending his entire life with just himself. Dinner was an awkward affair. None of the Fentons were used to eating together, so they didn't know how to act. The only ones vaguely comfortable with eating with an audience were Danny and Jazz, as Jazz would occasionally cook them dinner. There were a few times a month when Maddie cooked, but Danny and Jazz never ate it, too scared it would come to life and eat them from the inside. Even then, the family never had a true sit-down meal together like they were now. So, dinner was awkward, and Danny was all too happy to hide away in his room afterward. While his mom had made something without any ingredients from the fridge, and thus mostly safe, it was still strange to see her and Jack asking him and his sister about their day and their interests. They had never really done that before, and it was starting to freak him out. Alone in his solitude, Danny allowed himself to breathe. How did kids with normal, attentive parents do it? He couldn't even handle one day. He stood with his eyes closed and back against the door for a few minutes. Once his heartbeat evened out, as much as it could, he reached under his bed and pulled out the project he had been working on the week before everything went to crap. A star chart. It was a rendition of the constellation Pisces Australis, specifically focusing on Fomalhaut, a triple star system. Fomalhaut was his favorite star because it was one of the brightest in the night sky. Danny placed the chart on his desk and got out his markers. He resumed where he left off, coloring the outer bits of Fomalhaut and connecting it to the others. As he dragged his marker, it slipped from his grasp and landed on the desk with a clatter, causing his line to go off track a bit. Danny blinked. He had been holding the utensil in a strong grasp. Is he sure it was his left hand that was messed up? Shaking his head, he picked it back up. Or he tried to, but his hand went right through it as if being corporal was merely a suggestion. Wait, what was happening? Before he could ponder any further, Danny slipped from his chair and onto the floor with a bang. How had he slipped? His chair had armrests. There wasn't any space for him to slip. He rubbed the back of his head and looked up to his chair as if it held the answers, only for his eyes to widen when he saw his legs inside the chair. He shrieked before he could stop himself. His calves were starting to hurt, and after a few seconds they felt like they were on fire. He struggled to pull his legs out as he heard shouts and footsteps running up the stairs. By the time his door banged open, he had tears and snot running down his face, and his heart felt like it was going to grow legs of its own and beat out of his chest. Danny, what happened? What's wrong?" His mom knelt down beside him, looking frazzled. He distantly noticed bandages on her hands as his sister and dad rushed in after her. "Mom," he cried, throwing his arms around her. Maddie was visibly startled, but she quickly returned the gesture. He hasn't sought out reassurance from her in years, but it's not like she was ever available to give it anyway. "Mom," he continued. His chest hurt. "Mom, my leg, I can't." He gulped in air like a dying man would water every few words. He felt lightheaded. Was the room supposed to spin this much? "Danny, what's wrong with your legs? Show me, baby." His mom tried to figure out what was wrong. She sounded frantic, and Danny didn't blame her. She hadn't seen him this upset since he was a child. Jazz moved from where she was crouched beside his head to inspect his legs. "Danny, tell me, please, what's wrong with your legs? Did you hurt them?" She tried to get him to explain. Danny, who had been squeezing his eyes shut since he hugged his mom, looked down to see his legs on the ground, where they should be, not stuck in his chair being consumed by a fire he couldn't see. It was all he could do to keep his lungs working as he stared wide-eyed at his legs, his very much not stuck inside a chair legs, because that would be silly. Why had he thought that anyway? And why could he still not breathe? He was sweating now, and it made him feel uncomfortable. He was able to get out a quiet, "Oh," before his world went dark. This concludes Chapter 2 of Danny and the Phantom. The next chapter should be up soon. Thank you so much for listening.